They say you don't hear a trap snap shut if you're the one walking into it. You're too busy looking at the bait. I didn't hear it until it was too late. I was just trying to move a harvest. They were trying to build an empire of homeowners' fees and manicured lawns. They saw an old man on a tractor. They saw a relic, a nuisance. They forgot that before the suburbs, before the bylaws, and before the pavement, this was just dirt, and nobody knows the dirt better than the man who bled into it. They built a gate to keep me out. They should have built it to keep me in. The Grayson Trail. The morning it happened, the world was gray. Not the gray of a storm, just that flat, dead color of a Tuesday in November before the sun decides to show up. It was 5:15 a.m. I know the time because the digital clock on the dash of my Silverado flickers when it's cold. It was flickering. I had a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder, vibrating against the plastic. I was heading for the south exit, the old road. That's what we always called it. It doesn't show up on Google Maps anymore, and most people think it's just a fire trail. But for 70 years, that crushed gravel path was the only vein pumping blood out of this farm and into the county. I came around the bend, past the old oak tree that lightning split back in '98. I was expecting open air. I was expecting to see the county highway. Instead, I saw the black steel. It wasn't just a fence, it was a gate, 12 feet high, powder-coated black iron, shiny and wet with the morning dew. It looked expensive. It looked like something you'd find guarding a fortress or a prison. There was a keypad on a pillar, a little green light blinking in the dark like a cyclops eye, and right next to it, a sign, Clear Brook Meadows Community Association, residents only. I stepped out. The air smelled like rain and fresh concrete, that alkaline sting. They must have poured the posts overnight. I put my hand on the bars. Cold, solid. I shook it. It didn't rattle. My stomach didn't churn. I didn't get angry, not yet. It was a heavy, sinking feeling, like when you're swimming in the quarry and your foot gets tangled in the weeds. I looked up. Perched on top of the brick pillar was a camera, a small white dome. I heard the little electric whir as the lens rotated. It looked right at me. I stood there, a 60-year-old man in Carhartts, staring at a blinking light, realizing that the road my father drove and his father drove had just been stolen while I was sleeping. You think a weapon has to be made of steel to hurt you. You think it needs a trigger. But the most dangerous weapons in the world are made of paper. They taped a citation to the gate, the Good Neighbor Act. It said the road was closed for community aesthetics. 2 days later, I was stuck, literally. With the gate locked, I had to take the North Detour, a washboard dirt track that turns to soup when it rains. My grain truck was bogged down to the differential, and I was 2 hours late for a delivery. I had to make the call. I called Henderson Grain. Mike Henderson picked up. I could hear the warehouse noise in the background. I told him I was stuck. I told him about the gate. I could hear the disappointment in his voice. He said, "Sam, I like you, but I've got Cargill trucks lined up behind you. The market price just dropped 10 cents. I gotta fill the silo." He didn't yell. He just said the thing that hurt the most. He said, "I'm sorry, Sam. Fix your gate." Then he hung up. Fix your gate. It sounded so simple, like fixing a leaky faucet. But I sat there in the rain, realizing I had never lost a crop because a woman named Karen decided my truck was too ugly for her subdivision. That wasn't business. That was theft. And the doubt. Pacing. The atmosphere changes. The voice becomes quieter, more conspiratorial. The detective phase. That night, I went to the basement. My daughter, Ellie, was there. She's got a mind like a steel trap. She was on her laptop, pulling up county records, while I dug through boxes of old deeds that smelled like vinegar and dust. Ellie found the permit. Karen Vance had filed it under emergency security measures. They claimed they owned the easement. I spread out a map from 1974 on the ping-pong table. I pointed my finger at that thin black line. That's the road, I told her. It connects to County Road 9. Ellie looked at the overlay. She said, "Dad, the developer's map lists that as a private drive. If they own the land on both sides, they can gate it." My heart sank. Had we been using a road we didn't own for 50 years? Then I remembered. I remembered my dad talking about the King's Highway. I dug through a box of receipts until I found it, my grandfather's work ledger from 1952. I read the entry out loud to her. October 12th, 1952. County crew graded the south path, charged the township for materials. Ellie stopped typing. She looked at me. She said, "If the township paid for it, that means it was public maintenance." She pulled up the Department of Transportation archives, and there it was. Not a private drive. Township Route 404, an unmaintained public right-of-way. As the realization hit us both, the furnace seemed to stop humming. Karen Vance didn't own that road. The people owned that road. She had built a gate across a public highway. I picked up the keys to the machine shed. I told Ellie, "Tomorrow, we stop being neighbors. Tomorrow, we become the Department of Transportation." Focus, the physical battle, man versus nature. Hard, rhythmic, and driving. The narrator should sound like he is reliving the physical exertion. There's a difference between gardening and clearing. Clearing is an argument. It's you against 40 years of entropy. I took the Case 450 dozer. My mechanic, Lane, followed with a chainsaw. We started at the creek bed. The ghost road was a tunnel of green wire and poison ivy. You have to understand the sound of a dozer blade hitting a root ball. It's not a thud, it's a shudder. You feel it in your teeth. But we pushed. We peeled back the earth and found the old crushed stone underneath. We worked for 6 hours. My back was screaming, but we pushed that wall of briars right up to the property line. And then, through the thorns, we saw it. A manicured lawn, a white gazebo. We were looking right into the backyard of Clearbrook Meadows. Lane laughed. He said it looked like we found Oz. I parked the blade 6 inches from their flower bed and killed the engine. Later, we sat on the tailgate, covered in mud, drinking warm beer. It was quiet. The road was open, a straight shot from my barn to their gate. It looked ugly and raw and beautiful. I thought we had won. I thought we'd file the papers the next day and they'd have to unlock it. Then my phone buzzed on the metal tailgate. It was my lawyer, Grace. She didn't have good news. She said, "Sam, don't file the injunction." Apparently, Clearbrook Meadows had filed an emergency motion. They weren't disputing the road anymore. They knew they lost that, so they pivoted. They claimed the gate was aesthetic infrastructure and that they could charge a toll for security maintenance. I asked how much. Grace said $300. I thought she meant a year. She said, "No, Sam, $300 per entry." The trap hadn't snapped shut in the morning. It snapped shut right then. They didn't want to block the road. They wanted to bleed me dry. I looked down that cleared path at the black gate. It didn't look fragile anymore. It looked Humbry. Anger
burns hot, but the best kind of anger is cold. It clarifies things. I called the HOA office. I got a woman named Brenda. She sounded tired. I asked her who gets the money, the $300. She told me it went to a third-party vendor called CM Management Solutions. That was the loose thread. Ellie pulled on it.
Back in the basement, at 2 a.m., Ellie followed the paper trail. She found that CM Management Solutions was an LLC incorporated just 6 months ago. She tracked the billing address to a P.O. box. Then she tracked the P.O. box to a residential address. 44 Maple Street. I knew that house. It wasn't in the rich neighborhood. It was a little blue bungalow in town. It belonged to Mrs. Abernathy, the old librarian who passed away. Ellie looked at me and said, "Dad, guess who Mrs. Abernathy's daughter is?" Karen Vance. It all fell into place. Karen had created a shell company, hired herself to manage the gate, and was funneling the tolls into her dead mother's account. She was double-dipping, charging the HOA for the service and charging me for the access. It wasn't just a gate. It was a piggy bank. I stood up. The fatigue was gone. I told Ellie, print it, all of it. They say information is power. In a small town, information is ammunition. I brushed the dust off my funeral suit, because this time I was hoping to go to a burial.
I always thought victory would sound like a cheer, but real victory sounds like silence. We were in County Courtroom B. Karen Vance was there, looking confident in her navy suit. My lawyer, Grace, didn't make a speech. She just handed the judge a stack of papers. Exhibit C, the bank records connecting the LLC to Karen. I watched Karen. She didn't move, but the color drained out of her face. The judge asked her one question. "Miss Vance, is this your signature?" She tried to stammer something about logistical streamlining, but the judge cut her off. He said, "In this county, we call that fraud." He took off his glasses and looked at the map. He said, "The court finds that Grayson Trail is a public easement. The gate is an illegal obstruction. The plaintiff has 48 hours to remove it." Karen slumped in her chair. The Iron Lady had rusted through.
They didn't wait 48 hours. The county crews were there the next morning. I sat on my tailgate and watched. When that gate hit the ground, it made a sound like a church bell, a bell tolling for the end of the siege. They loaded the black iron bars onto a flatbed, looking like a dead spider. I got in my truck. I drove past the stump of wires where the camera used to be. I hit the gravel. My gravel. I rolled down the window and let the air rush in. It smelled like pine needles and diesel. It smelled like home. I looked out over the south field. The sun was setting, turning the corn stubble into gold. Karen is gone. The board voted her out. A new family moved in. They waved at me yesterday. My father was right. Land is a responsibility, but it's also a memory. We cleared the brush. We fought the paper. We won back the dirt. They say you can't fight progress. They say the small guy always loses, but they forget one thing. The land remembers who loves it, and it never forgets a debt.